Good evening, everybody, on this slightly chilly Tuesday evening. But we're going to have some nice warm company over here, and we're going to be chatting about a new topic tonight, and that is IBS, or otherwise known as irritable bowel syndrome. And for anybody who's had it or experienced it, it's not fun, and it's a little bit more than just irritating, I think. So let me get on with this, share my screen, and just figure out a little bit more about what is it, what isn't it, and how do we fix it? So, IBS, or irritable bowel syndrome, what it is, what it isn't, and how do you manage it? Because, and I'll use the terminology manage because unfortunately there isn't really a cure, but it can be managed and symptoms can be managed. So first of all, what is it? And the information I've got over here, I've taken from the Cleveland Clinic, which is one of the research universities that pushes out some very interesting information. So this is not my information. This is medical science that's coming through over here. So irritable bowel syndrome, or IBS, is a group of symptoms that affect your digestive system. Remember, your digestive system starts in your mouth and goes all the way through. It's a common but uncomfortable gastrointestinal disease or condition that affects your intestines. People with IBS experience symptoms that include abdominal pain and cramps, but there's actually quite a few different signs and symptoms, and what happens in one person doesn't always happen in another. With IBS, you may also have frequent diarrhea, constipation, or both. So this is why it's very, very difficult to actually get a diagnosis on IBS. You go to your doctor, and as I've always said with doctors, they've got to work out what your problem isn't before they can tell you what your problem is. So because all of these symptoms can be linked to other things, sometimes it's a bit of a lengthy process to go through to rule out what isn't there, so that they can say, okay, this is actually what the problem is. And sometimes you just have abdominal pain and cramps. Sometimes you have the diarrhea. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes you have the opposite problem. So it's very, very difficult to pin it down. And IBS doesn't cause tissue damage in your GI tract or your gastrointestinal tract, or increase your risk of more serious conditions like colon cancer. So if you have IBS, don't stress that you're now going to develop cancer. It's not where the problem comes in. It's the same as having continual cramps in your calf. It doesn't mean to say that your leg's going to fall off, for instance. So instead of stressing about these things, what it is, it's a chronic, which is meaning a long-term condition that most people can manage by changing their routines and what they eat. You can take medication, and you can also receive behavioral therapy, because as I go on, you'll understand a little bit more about what this means. Now, there are different types of IBS, and these are, researchers categorize IBS based on how your stools look on the days when you're having symptom flare-ups. So you can't say, oh, I've got X, Y, Z. It all depends on that particular flare-up. And stools, for those who are not familiar with it, are what comes out the other end. Most people with IBS have normal bowel movements on some days and abnormal ones on others. I think that's fairly normal with a lot of people. The abnormal days define the kind of IBS that you have. IBS with constipation, or IBS-C, most of your stools are hard and lumpy. IBS with diarrhea, or IBS-D, most of your stool is loose and watery, self-explanatory. And then you have the fun one, which is the combination or mixed, We have both the hard and lumpy bowel, as well as the loose and watery movements. So again, it's very difficult to point out this is the problem. You have this symptom and therefore this is your problem. Very, very difficult. And the differences are important because that's how the treatments work. And certain treatments only work with specific types of IBS, which makes life really exciting. So what are these symptoms? Symptoms of IBS can appear frequently, or they may occur only during your flare-ups. Again, very, very difficult. In other words, you don't always experience symptoms. So you could have some really good days, and then you have some really not so good days. So instead, symptoms may go away, and you'll have normal bowel movements. And other times, they return. Signs and symptoms of IBS include abdominal pain or cramps, usually related to the urge to go to the bathroom. Excess gas and bloating. And for anybody who's had excess gas, you feel bloated, and it's not fun. You could have diarrhea, constipation, or alternating between the two. And mucus in your stools may look whitish, if you ever want to look down there. Feeling like you're unable to empty your bowels after going to the bathroom as well. So those are all some of those feelings, and it's you feel like you need to go again, but there's nothing coming out. Now the big question is, what causes this problem? Now, the fun part is researchers don't know exactly what the cause is, but they classify it as a neurogastrointestinal or GI disorder. Very big word, don't stress about the terminology, but neuro means nerve, and obviously gastrointestinal is your gut, and it's a disorder of that. So these conditions, also called disorders of the gut-brain interaction, have to do with problems with how your gut and brain coordinate to help your digestive system work. Remember, it's been said that your gut is your second brain. And pardon me, ever heard that terminology of just go with your gut, or I felt it in my gut? Well, it's actually quite true, because your gut and your brain, interestingly enough, work very, very closely together. So communication challenges between your brain and your gut can cause dysmotility, meaning that you may have problems with how your GI muscles contract and move food through your GI tract. The colon, or the large intestine muscle, tends to contract more in people with IBS, and these contractions cause cramps and pain. Remember, your brain is the central computer of your whole body. So anything that happens in your body is controlled by the brain and various parts of the brain. So if there's a short circuit, for want of any better terminology, you're going to end up with problems where it's not communicating correctly. Think of a bad cell signal where the call keeps dropping. That is what happens between your brain and your gut. Now, the next type is visceral hypersensitivity, where you may have extra sensitive nerves in your GI tract. And people with IBS tend to have a lower pain tolerance than people without it. You've heard it said, some people have got a very high pain threshold, some have got a very low pain threshold, and some people I've come across have got a no pain threshold. But your digestive tract may be super sensitive to abdominal pain or discomfort. In other words, you just sort of look down and you go, oh, my tummy hurts. Sort of like a child who doesn't want to go to school because there was a test that they didn't study for, but they don't have IBS. They just have this imagined sensitivity of, I've got a sore tummy. People with IBS, it isn't imagined. You have a sore tummy, and it's not fun. Now, other potential causes of IBS include things like gut bacteria. Now, research has shown that people with IBS may have altered bacteria in their GI tract, which contributes to the symptoms. And studies have shown that the types and amounts of gut bacteria are different in people with IBS than in people without it. Remember, there's both good and bad bacteria in your gut. And as somebody once said, there's only so much real estate available. So there's only so much space available in your gut. And if there's an imbalance, you're going to have more bad bacteria than good bacteria. And this is going to lead to all sorts of problems because it's going to lead to illness, bloating, gas, all that discomfort. If there's more good bacteria, you're going to have a good day because everything's now running smoothly and in balance. So severe infections. Some people get diagnosed with IBS after a severe infection that affects their GI tract, suggesting germs may play a role. And this will include things like very severe appendicitis. Your appendix hasn't burst yet, but it's become very, very inflamed. And while doing some research the other day, I came across an interesting bit of information where about the appendix. And growing up, people always jokingly used to say that nobody really knew what the appendix was there for, apart from making your doctor happy because it was something he could charge for because he could take it out if there was a mild inflammation. They've since discovered, so current research is showing that there's actually a lot of bacteria, good bacteria, that sits in the appendix. And it's there for whenever there's an upset in your GI tract and there's now an overabundance of bad bacteria, you have some antibiotics, takes care of that, and your appendix now releases the good bacteria to bring the balance back into the system. Now, the problem comes if your fiber intake is low or lacking, you could end up with a blockage to the appendix, which means that now that good bacteria can't get out. Blockage is not a good thing ever, and that's where your appendicitis or an inflammation of the appendix comes about. And then they've got to take it out. And fortunately, I don't see too many appendectomies anymore, but I do still see them fairly regularly. And when I do, you know that those people are going to end up with problems later on, specifically children. So at some stage in their adult life, they're probably going to end up with other gastrointestinal issues. Not saying they will, but the chances are severely elevated. The other thing that causes IBS is a food intolerance. So sensitivities or allergies to certain foods may contribute to IBS. And these include things like gluten intolerance, dairy allergies or intolerance, that kind of thing. Childhood stress is another one. IBS is more common in people who experienced severe stresses in childhood. And we're talking major trauma. They were involved in a major car accident. There was a natural catastrophe that they were involved in. Maybe one or both parents died at a very young age. There were major, major stresses. We're not talking somebody bullied them at school and they had a bad hair day. Not that I'm condoning bullying, because continual bullying can become one of those severe stresses. Or we're not talking about they failed a test when normally they get straight A's. That's not a severe stressor. But the continual things, as I've spoken about before about stress can be good, but continual stress is very bad. It's like, think of a candle. You have a candle burning and you quickly move your finger through the flame, nothing happens. And you can move your hand through that flame numerous times, nothing's going to happen. But hold your hand over that candle just for a few seconds, and you're going to end up with a burn. And if you hold it there for longer, you're going to end up with severe burns and blisters. That is what stress does. So you had a near miss at the traffic lights and you got shocked and there was stress and your stress levels rise, but then they settle and life is good again. But it's that continual stress like we've had down here the last couple of days where there's been taxis that are striking and nobody's really known what's happening. So there's been this increased stress all over the place. If that continues for too long, it's going to cause problems later on. And I'm sure children not being able to get to school has been quite a severe stressor. But not only do you need the stresses, but you also need a trigger. So you've had the stress, life carries on, but now something happens to trigger that IBS, the inflammation. So if you have IBS, you may have noticed that certain things trigger the symptoms. And a trigger doesn't cause the condition itself, but it can cause or worsen a symptom flare-up. Now, some of these triggers include things like, sorry, ladies, periods. Women may notice symptoms worsen predictability according to their menstrual cycle. Certain food triggers vary from person to person. Still, common culprits that can trigger an IBS symptom flare-up include things like dairy, foods that contain gluten like wheat, and foods or drinks known to make you gassy. So things like cabbage, cauliflower are a couple of main ones, beans, that kind of thing that can cause a lot of gas. Or if you know that you have a gluten intolerance and you have bread, that's going to cause a problem. Specifically, if you have gluten with a stressor in your life. If there's a dairy allergy, you're going to end up with a problem. So sometimes these things are hidden. So when you are using food that has been produced in a plant, not by a plant, but you'll see there's a label. Learn to read the label, and you will look for things like made in a factory that uses tree nuts, or could contain gluten, or contains wheat that may have gluten, made in a factory that uses dairy. So those sort of words you need to look out for. My niece has got plenty of allergies. We often jokingly say she's allergic to life. But she's learned from a young age to read labels. And if in doubt, she'll go to her parents and say, can I eat this? Is there anything in here that's going to cause me a problem? Because she comes out with all sorts of symptoms, not IBS yet, but I wouldn't rule out the fact that she could possibly get it later on in life. Stress is one of those triggers. Some researchers suggest that IBS is your gut's response to stress. This is why IBS is sometimes called a nervous stomach or an anxious stomach. So what are your risk factors? IBS most often occurs in people in their late teens to early 40s. Women are up to twice as likely to get diagnosed with IBS. And other risk factors include things like an intolerance to certain foods, severe digestive tract infection, and this can be brought on by various different things, food, illness, any of that kind of thing. A history of abuse, which is one of the stresses that I spoke about in childhood. Diagnosis of anxiety, depression, or post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. And this happens after, as I said, major stress things. Kids who are involved in wars, natural disaster like an earthquake or tsunami or hurricane or something like that, severe car accident, your house burnt down, any of those sort of things can cause a problem. Many people with IBS also have other chronic pain conditions. And this is why it is sometimes very, very difficult to diagnose IBS, because if you have a chronic pain condition like fibromyalgia or polymyalgia, for instance, they're going to say, no, your gut is related to that condition, not IBS, but it could be masking. And conditions associated with an increased risk of IBS include things like, as I just said, fibromyalgia, which is it's pain in the muscles, basically. Chronic fatigue syndrome, or otherwise known as yuppie flu. Chronic pelvic pain. Ladies, unfortunately, again, you are generally the ones bearing the brunt of this. Now, what is the treatment for IBS? Remember, IBS is a series of symptoms. So how do you treat them? Sadly, there is no specific therapy that works for everyone, but most people with IBS can find a treatment plan that works for them. And again, unfortunately, this involves a lot of trial and error. Typical treatment options include changing the foods that you eat and your routine. So if you regularly do something that you know is going to cause a lot of stress, change that routine, if at all possible. If you are not exercising, you're not finding a way to get rid of that stress. I often jokingly say that my parkrun on a Saturday morning is my de-stress. And it might sound joking, but I'm actually being quite serious about it, because you have the tension of the week, and one of the ways of getting rid of tension is action. Now, I don't get a chance during the week to go to a gym, and quite honestly, I don't really care about going to the gym much, but I am fortunate in that I do have a fair amount of activity during the day, but sometimes it's not enough. And going for a run on a Saturday morning raises my endorphin levels, which brings my stress levels down, which makes me feel significantly better. And it doesn't matter whether it's the wind's blowing, I don't really like it like that, but the sun's shining or it's raining, I go for my run because I know that is my de-stress, and it's the cheapest and best drug that you can get. Medications can help too. Personally, I'm not a big fan of them. Behavioral health therapy may also help. And to find that out, you need to speak to a medical professional. So first of all, get diagnosed by somebody who knows what they're talking about, and let them refer you to a medical specialist who can help you with your behavioral health therapy. Many of these treatments take time to work. So unfortunately, while the symptoms happen in a flash, the treatment or results can take some time. What is that time period? It varies from person to person. So it's very, very difficult to say, if you start this treatment, you are going to see results within the next 24 hours or 48 hours. Sometimes it can take days, sometimes it can take weeks. Sometimes it'll only happen in a couple of months. So be aware of these things. And all of these treatments can help your symptoms, but your symptoms may not go away completely. You can put them on one side for a while, but should the stresses come out, or the triggers come out, they are going to flare up again. So some things like meal changes. A dietitian can help you choose foods and modify your eating or drinking habits to avoid symptom flare-ups. And they may recommend that you increase fiber in your diet. Fiber-rich foods, including fruits, vegetables, grains, prunes, and nuts, can help you if you're struggling with constipation. Introduce fiber slowly into your diet to give your gut time to adjust, because by rapid changing your diet could stress your gut, causing it to go into spasm, which will make your pain worse. And then you go, oh, that's not going to work. And you might be discarding something that could actually be very beneficial, but you had too much too soon and it caused a flare-up. And remember, there's different types of food, different types of fiber. It's not just things like wheat bix, for instance, or bran flakes. You get soluble, you get insoluble, you get lignans, you get pectins. There's a whole mess of different fibers. And it is a good idea to have a range of those fibers in your diet. And if you are not getting sufficient from your food, look at getting a fiber supplement, whether it's in tablet form, whether it's in powder form, that you can add to things like porridge, baking, that kind of thing. You need to have that extra fiber. As a diabetic, you're needing about 36 grams of fiber, 36, 37 grams of fiber a day. Normally, if you're a non-diabetic, you're going to need a good 24 to 26 grams of fiber per day. And if you're not getting it in your diet, think about supplementing. You can add supplemental fiber to your diet, which is what I just spoke about now. Limit your dairy products like cheese and milk. Lactose intolerance is more common in people with IBS. So if you cut back on dairy, make sure to eat non-dairy foods that are rich in calcium, like broccoli, spinach, or salmon, because your body still needs the nutrients or the minerals that come from the dairy. But if your gut can't handle the dairy because it doesn't have the correct amino acids to form the correct protein to break down the dairy sugars, in other words, your lactose, that's where the lactose intolerance comes from. You need to replace those minerals in another way. You need to limit foods that can make you gassy. So foods like beans, Brussels sprouts, and cabbage are notorious for causing gas, as are carbonated sodas and even chewing gum. They can also cause gas. Reduce these foods to go easier on your gut. And one of the ways to find out what your trigger is to have a food diary. And if you go to a dietitian, that's probably what they're going to encourage you to do. Keep a food diary for 2 days or maybe 3 days, just to get an idea of what's happening. And what a food diary is just a simple little notebook, and you make note of every single thing that passes your lips during that day. Water, gum, don't worry about what it is that you're eating. Make a note. At 10 a.m., I had a cup of coffee with 3 tablespoons of sugar and half a cup of milk. And half an hour later, I had this problem. Or I had black tea with honey, no problem. Go through that, and every single thing that passes your lips during the day, over a period of about 2 to 3 days, to get an idea, you'll be able to get a pretty good idea of what is triggering symptoms and what isn't. Try and avoid gluten, because we know that that is a common problem. So people with IBS, and even those without the celiac disease, tend to be more sensitive to gluten. And if you opt for a gluten-free diet, work with your health provider to ensure you're getting enough of the key vitamins and minerals like fiber, iron, and calcium, often found in foods with gluten. And try the low FODMAP diet. This food plan reduces the amount of hard-to-digest carbohydrates you eat. It recommends alternatives that allow you to get the nutrients you need while going easier on your GI tract. I'll talk a little bit more about that next week. And drink plenty of water. Drink at least 8-ounce glasses of water a day, which is about 2 liters, because water keeps your GI tract lubricated and can help treat or prevent constipation. And there we go with the food diary. Your provider may recommend that you note the foods you eat to determine which foods trigger the IBS flare-ups, and then bring this to a nutritionist. I'm going to stop there. We've got about 6 minutes left. So does anybody have any comments or questions before I stop the recording?